Drew Heinold, Esquire, personal injury attorney at Saltz, Mongalusi, and Bendeski in Philadelphia. He is a season ticket holder for the Union as well, so a little doop to him. And Drew, thank you for joining us first and foremost. Now, you listened to our podcast yesterday, and we had talked about potential legal implications between what the Reynas are doing and the Berhalters are doing and who can do what and how. I said something about defamation. You went into the DMs, correctly stated that maybe defamation isn't going to really stick. And we kind of wanted to get your thoughts on if there is any legal implications that maybe the Berhalters can do to the Reynas or vice versa, or what's happening here. Go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. I'll say if this fact pattern was one of my law school finals, I probably wouldn't have been a lawyer because it is complicated, convoluted, and there's a lot of different moving parts. But yeah, I did go into the DMs and give a little explanation, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of a couple different avenues. First, the first thing everybody says is defamation. But in this case, that's really not something that can go forward for one main reason. What the Reynas said was a true fact. Mm-hmm. Greg Berhalter came out and admitted that what was said was a true event. So therefore, and that's the most important and key part, is that it's defamation is a false statement. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not other potential avenues. One of the biggest ones would be, and it gets a little complicated and convoluted like the rest, is either what's called a tortious interference or tortious interference of a prospective economic advantage. And what that means is somebody from the outside either interferes with a business contract that you have or interferes with a business opportunity. And the timing of all of this makes it interesting because, for a tortious interference, there needs to be a contract. Greg Berhalter was the coach of the U.S. national team when this occurred. But the defendant needs to be aware of that. They need to purposefully provide information that can affect that contract. But where that really is going to get hung up for the Berhalters, if they decide they wanted to pursue it, is the damages. He saw his contract out to December 31st. There was no actual ramification to that. Now, in terms of the prospective economic advantage, this is where it comes interesting, because if he doesn't stick around as the U.S. coach and gets rehired, there are arguments to be made that the statements by the Reynas impacted that, and then to what effect did that impact that? And it gets, in the logistics of it, it gets very muddy because, Ernie Stewart is friends with them. Brian McBride are friends with them. They'd get brought in and they'd have to ask questions about his actual coaching and his success or lack thereof, whichever side wants to present it. The decisions he made and whether those decisions would have led him not to be renewed of the contract. If that's the case, there's likely not much the Berhalters can do for this. There is another avenue that it could be, is what's called intentional infliction of emotional distress. And basically it's someone makes a comment and does actions that have to be extreme and outrageous, and the arguments can be.
Drew, would this be in the case of Greg Berhalter's wife, for example?
So it actually could be both. Hers would arguably be stronger than his because she was a victim of this traumatic event and having to relive that, having her family relive that, 31 years later. That would kind of be the direction that there potentially would be a claim. But then there's also the question of, the Berhalters, is it worth it? What is the damages? What's worth dragging the family deeper into this than what it is? If he gets a job and goes to Europe and he ultimately wanted to go to Europe, what is the damages for the interference into the contract? I will say,
sickening to hear.
In hearing the talking about his comments today, which I hadn't heard until I was listening to you guys, Berhalter's comments today about he wants to still be the coach. I don't know if to what extent that is purposely put in, because, they probably have already talked to somebody. And as you heard, everybody, once this comes out, everybody has someone in the background advising them words to say and what to say and what not to say. But certain comments that are made have hurt and helped each side. And, it's tough when you're really into it to think 2-3 years down the road, if you're in a courtroom, those comments in the first 48 to 72 hours, could really have an impact. But from both sides, that's the case.
Yeah. Drew, let me ask you this. With regard to Greg Berhalter's statement, he said that somebody had contacted U.S. Soccer with information that could, in quotes, take me down. Is that an assumption of a blackmail or a threat? Because I think that's what a lot of people are hung up on right now, is some of the language being used, and we've talked about it while you were in the green room on the show about Claudio Reyna using the word I a lot, his wife using the word I, and not a lot of us's and we's in certain things to cover specific statements, and then Greg Berhalter saying this information that could take me down in quotes. I mean, where does that lend into kind of where this goes from here? Because some of it seems quite accusational, right?
Yes, and one of the interesting factors is what court would this case play out in? There's and it depends on where the phone calls are made, where the harm is done. One of the areas,
Judge Judy.
Judge Judy. Well, I think she makes her own rules. So
I want them to go on Maury Povich. Can we figure that out?
But realistically, one of the places would be Illinois, because that's where U.S. Soccer is, and their laws for blackmail, they call it extortion. There needs to be actual damage, and at this point, it runs into the same issues that we talked about with the tortious interference and the potential contract. That could be an avenue, and that would kind of run the same line. Now, that could potentially be limited to just the U.S. Soccer contract, and not necessarily any endorsement impact that could have for him, because she was not the one to make that public and he was. So from the extortion blackmail side, that's kind of where I see it from the initial.
Drew, all I have to say is this is incredible for you to break it down like this. So we appreciate you on the show. Because this is awesome. I've learned a lot, and hopefully the Berhalters and the Reynas can just move on with their life, and it doesn't come to this long, lawsuit that drags out and involves the kids, which is that's for me what I'm thinking about is their kids on both sides.
Yeah, and you'd expect and hope that any attorney that they consult with will weigh all of those factors, including that on whether it's worth pursuing.